I ask you to join me in thinking back to what was a very beautiful day in New York City. It was the 11th of September, 2001. On that particular day, as we recall, 4 commercial airliners were hijacked by a set of operatives. 2 of those airlines were flown into the World Trade Center in New York. Another crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. The 4th was flown into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. During those events, more than 3,000 people were killed. Among them, even members of an investment firm founded by a graduate of Haverford College. In response to those murderous operations by people we came to designate terrorists, there was a declaration of war announced by then President George H. Bush. He was supported by Congress and supported, I believe, by a great many people in this country. It was regarded by many as a just war. There followed then military invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. We deposed the head of state in Iraq. He was subsequently hung. Tens of thousands of citizens in Iraq and Afghanistan lost their lives as a consequence of the interventions of our military into their country. Tens of thousands of American servicemen and servicewomen were killed or injured, their bodies, minds, and souls mangled. Millions of people in Afghanistan and Iraq were displaced. All in response to one day's events, the 11th of September of 2001. I ask you now to try and imagine a different historical setting and occasion. It is 1619. It is the occasion of the first enslavement of African peoples in the colony of Virginia. That enslavement continues. In the late 1770s, over 100 years later, those colonies are forged into a new nation state, the United States of America, dedicated to the proposition of freedom and to the enslavement of people African and of African descent, and to the genocidal elimination of people who were native to this continent when the settler colonists from Europe came over and renamed this continent America. From 1619 on, for centuries, millions of African people were kidnapped, purchased into enslavement, packed into ships, worse than sardines, sent on a transatlantic voyage where millions died. Those who survived were taken to the seasoning grounds of the Caribbean, where they were broken as human beings to make them fit slaves. Millions of these human beings were so treated over several centuries. There was even a civil war, primarily among white folks in this country, that raged for 5 years, at the center of which was the question of the continued or discontinuation of the enslavement of African people and their descendants. 600,000 citizens died during that 5 years of civil war. 600,000. Even so, after that war, Jim Crow oppression flourished, enforced by terroristic violence, including lynching, to which some families packed picnic lunches and took their children to watch the lynching of black folks. This too persisted for decades into centuries. Even at the end of that war, with several amendments to the Constitution to ensure the citizenship of black folks, to ensure that they would have the right to vote, it was another 100 years before we had the Voting Rights Act to really try and ensure that black folk could vote. And remember, all of this was supported, was sanctioned, was justified philosophically, religiously, theologically, politically, by the finest minds and the most established disciplines in the finest institutions of higher education in this country. For centuries. Come the 1950s, a movement for freedom and civil rights, led and symbolized by this man, Martin Luther King Jr. So my first question for our consideration this evening is why? Why nonviolence? Why was that the option chosen? "33 years after King's death by assassination, there is this day of planes being hijacked and flown into buildings and fields, and 3,000 people die, and the response of the nation is to go to war. A war in which we lose thousands of our own people, we kill thousands of other people, we displace millions of other people, all because we are convinced we are justified in doing so by what occurred on one day to the cost of 3,000 lives. Yet several centuries of dehumanizing brutalization, millions of people kidnapped, sold into enslavement, and yet the response is to call for the resolution of the injustices through a movement for freedom and justice through nonviolence infused and guided by love. Explain that. How do we explain Martin? $3,000 people dead, attacks by terrorists, warfare. Millions dead, millions brutalized, dehumanized, declared not fully human for centuries. One day, 3,000, century, millions. Nonviolent love. Why? How do we account for that? Why haven't black people responded to what has been visited upon us the way the United States responded to what happened on 9/11/2001? Why have we not? If there are any grounds for a just war, do we not have them? Why was there no coalition of the willing prepared to invade the United States to liberate black people from dehumanizing brutalization for centuries? Why was there no such coalition as there was for the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan? Had there been such a coalition, how many of us believe that white folks in the United States would have welcomed the invasion of this country by such a coalition and celebrated their coming to liberate black folks for freedom and democracy? What is the likelihood they would have been met at the borders and welcomed with flowers? Martin Luther King Jr. in the Age of Obama, the title for this evening's venture. We're not in the age of Obama. Was that an amen? Oh, indeed, that he was elected to the presidency is historic. But his presidency is not yet age-defining. There are many people, including in Congress, who are determined that he shall fail. There are many in this country who wish to completely delegitimize him as president, even as a citizen of the United States. We must wait a while longer to see whether and to what extent Barack Hussein Obama will leave an imprint worthy of being called the age of Obama, and to what extent and to what ends he in fact imprints history. Martin Luther King Jr., I would offer you, has more significance as a figure and a symbol than he ever had as a living, speaking, call drum major for justice, provoking us to be our very best. He is claimed by more people, black and white, in death than he ever was embraced while he was alive. He is claimed for more causes now than ever he was associated with when he was alive. And it's interesting to hear sometimes people in Congress and the legislature invoking Martin Luther King Jr. in opposition to things that we think would be cases of furthering social justice in this country. He has become virtually everybody's figure for the taking. But he is dead. He is a figure, not a live person, a figure, a symbol, to be appropriated, redefined, and used as those who appropriated him see fit. Martin Luther King Jr. was not the principal resource, nor the resource of principles to which our nation turned after those murderous attacks on 9/11, 2001. That is not where we went as a nation. And let us be reminded, President Barack Obama, in his speech accepting the Nobel Prize for Peace, gave his own argument for just wars. What then, I ask you to consider with me, is the point of an occasion such as this evening? What is the point in particular for a residential learning community, especially one with Quaker traditions? And the question that has been somewhat troubling to me is, why am I here? What is the point of being invited to return to an institutional community to which I came by invitation 30 years ago with a wife and a young son, and from which I departed 21 years later with the same wife and 3 sons, all of whom are now headed into adulthood? Professor Sister Tracy has offered up for your consideration a case of why I have been honored by an invitation to return to Haverford, and I do want you to know I am honored by this invitation. I am moved and especially grateful for the regard that you have for me, that she has expressed, Sister. Thank you. And those whom you consulted and quoted. The regard that, in your judgment, merits my being invited back to Haverford. I am honored and I am especially moved by the presence of all of you here this evening. I am especially rewarded by the gift of friendship from so many of you. Loving friendships that continue to nurture my soul and the soul of wife Frida, who was very upset this morning that she couldn't be here. That I continue to be nurtured by those of you who were initially colleagues and became friends, who keep faith with me as a friend, as a cherished friend, even though I left this community. So let me take a moment to thank you one and all for your presence and for your gift of an invitation to return to Haverford and for your gift of friendship and collegiality. And especially Sister Professor Tracy Hooks, thank you for that introduction. And Brother President, for yours. Thank you. Still, what are we to make of this occasion? I've struggled with the question, what am I to offer in being invited back to Haverford? What can I offer that would be worthy of your gifts of presence, your high regard, for the investments in me, from support for travel, for honorarium, for dinner, and time together? And I've concluded I can but offer you some considerations. Considerations that I hope will become the basis for some discussion tomorrow during the community dialogue. So let me then share these considerations with you. Recall again that our nation went to war in response to the murderous attacks of 9/11/2001, and that over 50 years ago, there emerged this movement that helped to transform our nation, a movement for freedom and civil rights and justice, known as the Civil Rights Movement, known intimately to those who were making that movement as the Freedom Movement. And that Martin Luther King Jr. has in many respects come to be the central figure of and for that movement. And that this was a movement defined, structured, and disciplined by principle commitments to a philosophy of nonviolence infused with agape love, explicitly. After centuries of brutalizing dehumanization, here was a movement defined as a quest for justice by nonviolence and love. After centuries, after the deaths of millions of people, through a process of going to a continent and selecting only the most viable men, women, and children for enslavement. I mean, just imagine for a moment what the United States would be like if every year for 100 years, all of the college-age young people were removed from this country. What would his future be like? Still, the attempt to redress that was through a movement defined by nonviolence and love. Now, what I want to offer for our consideration first is the following. Martin Luther King Jr., that movement, the people who made that movement were a profound gift to this nation. Martin Luther King Jr., that movement, the people who made that movement were a profound gift to this nation. Perhaps here's a way to appreciate what I mean by the gift. Compare Martin Luther King Jr. to Osama bin Laden. They both have grievances. They both think that there's something been wrong. They both seek redress. How do they seek redress? Compare the strategies, compare the operations, compare how the two men invoke others to action, and think out the consequences. Let's put it differently. What would be the condition of our country if black folk had functioned like Al-Qaeda? What if black people had defined and characterized white people the way Al-Qaeda characterizes Western, non-Muslim, Christian, and Jewish people? What would our country look like? I offer again for your consideration that Martin Luther King Jr., that movement, was an extraordinarily profound gift. A gift. A gift out of love to this country. The millions of death and the centuries of brutalizing dehumanization notwithstanding. Why that particular take on redress? Again, we are focused particularly upon Martin Luther King Jr., but let me lift up for your consideration another person. How many of you are familiar with the name Reverend James Morris Lawson Jr.? Most of you are not. Quick story. James Morris Lawson was born in Illinois and grew up in a household of a minister. One day, as a young kid, I think it was somewhere around the age of 10 or so, he was African-American. His mother sent him to the store. And on his way to or from the store, he was walking along the street. There was a car with some white boys sitting in the car, and they looked out and saw him, and they yelled out and called him a nigger. So young Jimmy simply walked up to the car and reached in and pimp slapped the absolute crap out of this white boy that called him a nigger. You know, some of us, they go, oh, right on. Woo! So he goes home and gives his mother what she sent him to the store to get, and she tells him what happened. He tells his mother what happened. And to his great surprise and chagrin, his mother looked at him and said, "And what did that achieve, Jimmy?" Because he thought, called me a nigger, I slapped his face from one side to the other. His mother's like, and what did that achieve, Jimmy? So being a very bright young kid, he went away and sat down and began to think, what did that achieve? Those reflections and his later studies led this young man into a firm conviction against violence. He grows up. He's called for induction into the U.S. Army. There's a war in Korea. He's convinced that there's something fundamentally wrong about violence and about war, where God's children are involved. He refuses induction. He's imprisoned. He spends a year or so in a federal prison. He gets out. He goes to India for missionary service and an opportunity to study the teachings of Gandhi. Gandhi is dead. He studies Gandhi's teaching. He meets a lot of Gandhi's advisors and other people. And while doing missionary service, he's, of course, studying these teachings. But he's also reading through newspapers that there's something happening in the United States back home. This movement has erupted. And he concludes, I need to go home. He returns to the United States and he enrolls in Oberlin College to study theology to prepare to become a minister. While he's at Oberlin, this risingly prominent young minister out of the South is invited to Oberlin to speak by a young professor at Oberlin, Harvey Cox. Some of us know now is a very prominent member of the faculty of the Adventist School at Harvard. Harvey Cox invites Martin Luther King Jr., and King comes to speak, and Harvey Cox introduces the young James Morris Lawson to Martin Luther King Jr., and they begin to talk in private and find out they have a lot in common, that both are committed to nonviolence. And Martin Luther King Jr. says to him, we need you in the movement. You should come south. And James Lawson says, well, you know, I have been thinking about it, and sometime he says, no, says Martin. Don't wait. Come now. James Morris Lawson considers and says, yeah, I think I should. So he leaves Oberlin and enrolls in the Divinity School at Vanderbilt University. This is the late 1950s. He's admitted. I think he's the second African-American admitted to the Divinity School at Vanderbilt. Thus, and the Divinity School is the first school that admits African-Americans to Vanderbilt. He comes in, and the movement in Nashville is unfolding. James Morris Lawson becomes the teacher of the philosophy of nonviolence to the Nashville movement. Not as a tactic, but as a philosophy of life, out of which come various tactics about how to cope with violence when you're involved in civil disobedience. Among his students, Diane Nash, John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, Bernard Lafayette, and a host of others. You may not know that Nashville became the first city to begin voluntary desegregation in the country as a consequence of that movement in the city. Now, a great many of the fathers of the city and of Vanderbilt University were not pleased. Chair of the Board of Trustees, who was also the editor and publisher of one of the two local newspapers, the clearly most segregationist, racist newspaper, the Banner, was not pleased at all. He pressured the then Chancellor, Harvey Branscombe, to expel James Lawson. And so they did. They expelled him, 1959. Early 1960s. He stayed around for a while, and he tells a story. He had a great time at Vanderbilt. Loved his colleagues, played football, went and ate and ran, had, in the dining center. And he didn't know at the time that, white colleagues from the Divinity School, his classmates, would be going to Rand with him to have lunch. He didn't know that they were going to try to protect him because he wasn't supposed to be having lunch in Rand because he was black. Well, he didn't know. He was playing football and having a great time. Met a woman who was a secretary to one of the most prominent Southern theologians who was on the side of the movement. They married, Dorothy. They are still, etc. Now, I know all this because I've had the great fortune over the last 4 years of spending time with Reverend Lawson, who I was able to help persuade to return to Vanderbilt as a distinguishing visiting professor for 4 years. It's been an interesting story to watch this return, as I say, where a university gets a second chance to do it right. Martin Luther King Jr. called James Lawson the greatest teacher of nonviolence alive. My point about this story is the significance of James Morris Lawson to that decision to seek redress through nonviolence and love, and to suggest if you really want to have a significant voice here sometime about nonviolence and King, contact James Morris Lawson. I can tell you all the phone numbers. Right? He is a phenomenal human. Spending time with him for 4 years has changed my life. He's a phenomenal human being. Lawson left after being expelled from Vanderbilt. He went to Memphis, where he pastored a church for a number of years. And then there was this strike by sanitation workers. It was James Morris Lawson who picked up the phone and called Martin and says, "We need you in Memphis. You must come to Memphis." Martin did, but he did not leave alive. Again, spending time over the last 4 years with James Morris Lawson has helped me to appreciate the profundity of a decision to orient one's life around a commitment to nonviolence, not as a strategic move or tactic, but as a philosophically grounded commitment to life and to love. What I'm offering for your consideration is that commitment invested in a movement to transform this country was a profound gift. It's not what we did after 9/11/2001. I would offer you no person could survive as President of the United States who would take such a position in response to such an attack. He or she could not survive as president. They would be regarded as weak, indecisive, don't have the wherewithal to defend the country. And again, I say 3,000 people died, many more times that of our own service women and men are dead, many times more are wounded, maimed, distorted in many kinds of ways, tens of thousands of civilians in both countries, and millions are displaced. What should be our choice about this? I ask then that we consider this gift, that we consider the man, not Martin, the figure, but the man, a fallible human being with frailties just like the rest of us. He was not a god. But yet, he gave us this gift that helped to transform our country, and did it in a way that not even our country has the courage to elect when faced with major challenges. What does this mean for a learning community like Haverford? Is this a gift that we study? Study this gift. Do we plumb the depths of this gift? I would argue such a study is a profound moral, educational responsibility of an institution grounded on Quaker principles. It is a responsibility that should manifest itself in the structure and content of our curricula, in the day-to-day practices of life within the college and by-college community, within the structuring of the demography of the college, not just in our students, not only in a few faculty of color, in the formation of our administration, our board of managers as well. In the first year that I was at Haverford in 1980, I was invited to give a talk at Collection about diversity. My good friend Doug Davis and others probably know about this talk because the central question I asked was, what do we mean by diversity at Haverford? And I offered two models that Tracy referred to. Here's a house, Lou. You can have a room in the house. You can decorate this room any way that you think is appropriate to your cultural background. Help yourself. But don't try to change the rest of the house. Here's your room. Go for it. The rest of the house, we got that. It's one. The other is, we're planning on a redecorating of the house. Lou, would you come be on the decorating committee? And every room is up for discussion. The other question, I said, now, all I want you to do is tell me which one of these models most closely approximates what we're up to at Haverford. I never got an answer. Well, I never got a direct answer. Didn't take much to figure out that the answer was really the first model. And, part of my thing was, just tell me what game we're playing. That's okay. I mean, I might be able to get along with either one. I just want to know what game we're playing, just to be honest about the game. Right. The other I asked was, how diverse do you really want to be? We know what tends to happen in predominantly white neighborhoods when folk of color move in. One or two, no problem. 3 or 4, 6, 7, 8, or 9, house for sale. Now, this is serious business. This is really serious business. This country is undergoing the most profound demographic transformation ever in its history. Ever in the history of the United States, the demography is under transformation right now. In a way it has never, ever been in the history of the United States of America. And very soon now, white people will be a part of the plurality, not a majority. for a nation that was founded as a white supremacist nation state. Now, most predominantly white colleges and universities sail along with the misguided denial that racial identity is part of the identity of the institution. Show me what catalog at Haverford says we're a white school. Doesn't happen. And part of my argument was there is a limit to the elasticity in and around this college about demography. We don't know what the limit is because nobody has a fixed, specified point. Nobody is really prepared to say, okay, Lou, we can have this many students of color and no more, because after that, it's really not going to seem to be ours anymore, and we might experience white flight. And this is a conversation I had with the president. How diverse do you want to be, before we get to the tipping point where we start to experience some flight? There are very few predominantly white institutions that can get to that tipping point and survive. One of the interesting ones is Wesleyan. Wesleyan has a nickname of Diversity U. I mean, you can walk around Wesleyan, my oldest son went there, and, you go around Wesleyan, you can stand in the middle of the campus of Wesleyan, you are never going to be at a time where you can hardly ever see students where there are no students of color present. I would walk around Haverford for hours of the day and never see a student of color. But it's a serious issue. Because people do identify with their neighborhoods, their homes, their schools, their colleges, their universities, et cetera. Even though they don't want to acknowledge it in racial terms, that is a factor in identifying what's good, what's safe, what's of high quality, et cetera, et cetera. It's part of the structure of our cultural life in this country. It affects Haverford College, Bryn Mawr College as well. So one of my questions was, okay, we want to diversify. How diverse do we want to be? What's the tipping point? Are we prepared to approach it? And so I had, one provost said to me, we don't have to worry about that, Lou. We're never going to get to that point. Well, there were a couple ways I could interpret that. It'll take a long time to get there, or be assured we ain't going to get there, Lou. So I wasn't quite sure what I was being told. But again, these are issues, right, that I think we have to probe. And again, what I'm offering for our consideration is this person in whose name we come here this evening joined with a lot of other people that made a movement, gave us a profound gift. What will we make of that gift? And I am arguing or offering for your consideration, taking up and making well of that gift requires courageous deliberateness about the matters. You can't just happen upon that. Barack Obama, I also offer for your consideration as a gift. Barack Obama was not expected. He was not predicted. Not even most black people in this country believed Barack Obama was going to be elected president of the United States. It was only after white Americans in our lifted Obama up that a lot of African Americans said, what? Right? I mean, because the standard line among most black folk, particularly of a certain age, was, Oh, they are never going to do that. They being white folks. Oh, they are never going to do that. Do what? They ain't never going to go in behind no booth, behind no curtain, and no black man president of the United States. They ain't never going to do that. That was what we believed about white folks. Is that right, Pat? I just want to check with my brother. I mean, this is my colleague from Morgan State University I haven't seen in 3 decades, whose artwork graces our home. Thank you. That was what we believed, that y'all, white folk, wouldn't do it. There are not a whole lot of black folks in Iowa. And yet, they did. Now, my way of accounting for that is the following. Over the last 4 decades in this country, we have produced, for the first time in the history of this country, a critical mass of what I call new white Americans. What defines new white Americans fundamentally is that they have you have no investment in white racial supremacy. If you took a program of white supremacy to new young white Americans and say, here's an explicit program, I want you to sign on to this, they'd look at you like you had lost your mind. They can't understand why anybody would want to sign on to something that stupid and that vicious. You cannot convince them to become deliberate racist supremacists. That is unprecedented in the history of the United States of America. Now look, there have always been what we had to know growing in Mississippi. There have always been what we call good white people. Always have been good white people. We never would have made it without the assistance of good white people. There would have been no successful movement in Nashville or anywhere else without the support of good white folk. There have always been such people. We've never had them as a critical mass. In 2008 and 9, they constituted a critical mass in the United States of America. And they were created, I believe, first and foremost, through the hard-won battles that had been realized in colleges and universities and high schools and elementary schools under the name of the cultural wars and multicultural education. We produced new generations of young white people in this country who had been educated in ways unlike any previous generation of white people had ever been educated in this country. And we were doing it, including at places like Haverford and Bryn Mawr.
That's an amen.
It changed the nation. Roger, am I way off base?
No, sir.
I got to check with my historian. We educated young white men and women. We helped to structure in them new sentiments, new passions, new emotions that were unprecedented for white people in the United States of America in anything approaching those numbers. And we did it particularly in places of higher education. And thus, Barack Obama got elected president of the United States because black people didn't believe it could be done. We were not even prepared to do it. We didn't think he could win. We didn't believe. White people made us believe. That sound right, Pat?
It's pretty accurate.
And I am saying, We did something in colleges and universities. It was a battle. Not everybody agreed. Many people thought it was watering down standards, corrupting education, changing the nature of the institution, on and on and on and on and on. We changed bit by bit, year by year, class by class, course by course. We slowly built a critical mass in this country, the consequence of which is that they end up aligning with other folk such that we cross this critical historical threshold of electing to the presidency a person identified as of African descent. And what I'm proposing is that if we take seriously the gifts and make those gifts central to our study and understanding of our lives in this country and what is possible, there is more yet we can do. Obama is a gift of challenging possibilities for us as a people in this country. He's not typical. He's not the heir to Martin Luther King Jr. He's not the heir to Jesse Jackson. He's a different kind of being. He's hard for a lot of people to fathom. They can't quite figure him. He doesn't fit easy stereotypes. And I keep saying, he's a gift. He's a gift. We've got to retune our expectation. We've got to retune how we think someone identified as a black male is supposed to think, talk, and act. No, he's not typical. Black folk mad at him because he ain't black enough. Right? Some women, white women my wife worked with, were really very upset. Why is he married to, Michelle? She's like, what? So she was like, what do you mean? What? Why is he married to a black woman? Now, let's be clear. One of the difficult parts of the political struggle in predominantly white institutions has always been the women question, when that question is really about white women. Not women of color, white women. So here were these white women upset that a man whose father was African and mother was white is being identified as black because, well, where is his mother in all of this? And the wife was sitting there with her mouth, like your mouth hanging on. She's like, what the hell? And I was like, sweetheart, you got to understand part of what's going on here. These white women are upset. They're not getting any play. And they mad. Because he's married to a black, you're sitting there trying to figure out, what is this? These are highly educated, really prominently positioned women that she's working with in state government. And they are mad because he's married to a black woman. Why did he have to marry her? Oof. Right? This stuff runs deep. And sometimes we don't really want to talk about, and one of the things I said, is one of the things about white supremacy. There are two things about white supremacy, well, three things about white supremacy that really anger me, right? The obvious one is I get mad about what it meant for, what happened to black folk. That's one thing. But then there's another, more complicated one. One of the things about white supremacy is what it did to white females. You want to talk about a game being run on people. What white supremacy did to white females is just mind-boggling to me. I still don't get it. I still don't get how many white females are caught up in this bullshit, even today, in the fashion industry and everything, driving women into sickness of, new. I don't get it. I mean, I just don't get how this use of white and abuse of females by male white males, on the one hand, gonna put you over here and then kill anybody who touches you and drive you into sickness. Right? The worst one is what white supremacy did to children. No child is born a racist. Every white person who became a racist was taught to be a racist. Every child. And to take a child and put them in every key institution, family, school, church, work, you name it, and educate them to be a racist, is just mind-boggling to me. And that's why I get so excited about what happened in the 80s and 90s across this country at Haverford and Bryn Mawr. We produced new white Americans that helped to change the history of this country. We can do more. Obama is a gift who is an occasion for serious reconsiderations about the possibilities of this country. He is enormously challenged right now. The political game is getting tight and ugly. Many of us didn't show up for the congressional elections in November. And I'm astounded when I hear many people, particularly on the Republican side, going around talking about the election by saying, well, the American people. And I want to say, well, excuse me, hold up, brother. I voted. I didn't vote for your people. I don't agree with you. Am I not part of the American people? This appropriation of this notion of the American people spoke my words and language and agenda, and where are the rest of us? We have got to intensify the work in our colleges and universities of preparing young people for responsible citizenship in this nation at this moment in its history. We have gifts to tap as inspiring, guiding resources for what we might do and how we might do it. That, to me, is part of the great legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and the people who were with him in that movement. That is part of what inspires me about Barack Obama. These gifts who can allow us, if we will, to become better than we have ever been. It will not be easy. There is nothing easy about it. Some aspects of it are frightening. To put the identity of the college up in the air for serious discussion is not a trivial matter. A plunge in applications, and this brother's out the door. I can tell you, right, when I went to Vanderbilt in 2000, there were probably 10,000 undergraduate applications. The last cycle, there were 21,000. We have only 1,600 places for first-year students. We now have what is called the Commons, a series of 10 dorms, 10 houses with live-in faculty. We started with the house system. And in those 10 houses, we can only house 1,600 first-year students. And all first-year students have to live in those houses for the first year. We only have room for 1,600 people. We had 21,000 applications. Vanderbilt used to have one of the highest percentages of students from the highest income brackets in the country, of any college university in the country. Today, something like 60% of Vanderbilt students are on some form of financial assistance. That has been a very deliberate shift in the demographic makeup of the undergraduate student population at Vanderbilt. There are some very, very angry, wealthy Vanderbilt alums. I mean angry. Our associate provost for admissions and enrollment management told me last year, he said, I've been in admissions for a long time. I've been at Vanderbilt for 4 years. It's been, some of the greatest 4 years, he said, but this has been the worst year of my career. What people call in to say to him, because their son or daughter was not being admitted to the place that grandfather and grandmother and uncle or aunt, brother or sister, mother or father went. The metrics are off the chart. Every year, for the 10 years I've been there have been more applications for more people of color than ever in the history of the university. Every year, the record gets broken. And the numbers are still going up for total number of applications. No loans, need blind admission. So, there's a very tricky thing going on. A lot of money coming in through contributions from alums and other people, and more of their kids are not being admitted. There are some angry people who are calling in and saying, we know you didn't admit my son or daughter because you had to give that place to some person of color. Or alums who whisper to the chancellor, don't you think you got enough of them already now? As the demography of this country changes, there's going to be even more intense pressure for various people to want to be various places, including in various colleges and universities. How will we cope? How will we cope? If the threat of white flight comes to Haverford, what will we do? How will we cope with that? That's a very real possibility. We have to, I think, continue to produce generations who will join with others in becoming that critical mass who will change this world. We have done it at Haverford. I had the good fortune of being here for 2 decades with many of you to contribute to that. It wasn't that we were always convinced that's exactly what we were doing and we knew we were going to change the world and in 20 years we will elect Barack Obama. We had no clue. Many of us believed and we simply worked at it. I'm a beneficiary of that. My 3 sons are beneficiaries of having lived in this environment. I was saying to Stephen over dinner, number 2 son, Kofi, sometimes when life gets a little troubling for him, he lives in New York and works as a writer for doing movie reviews and stuff now and doing quite well. Sometimes when his soul gets disturbed, if he happens to be in the Philly area, he drives out to the Haverford campus, parks his car, and walks the campus just to be home again. Frida and I talk very frequently about our lives over 2 decades in the Haverford College community, how profoundly shaping it was how this became for me, particularly as a social philosopher, Haverford became my great experiment in social transformation. This was my living experiment in realizing philosophical notions about how to do it differently, better, and democratically. My life was enriched, and I thank you all for that. I hope that the considerations I have shared have been worthy of the regard you have for me and for the invitation you've extended me to return. Thank you very much. Keep faith and continue to build the new generations of good folks of all colors. Thank you.